It's like magic.
Yeah, great. All right, sorry guys. So you might remember from the presentation that we had in terms of the shape of Athens and the layout of all the roads. Let's imagine that you were an aspiring philosopher. You were kind of on your way to study at Plato's Academy, and you're going up the way on the road. But on your way to the academy, you run into a garden. And at that garden, you see the following thing posted. Stranger, here you will do well to tarry. Here, our highest good is pleasure. This isn't actually in your textbook, but the good people at Wikipedia and Google in translation assure me that this is from Seneca, Moral Letters to Silius, 2110. And Michael can correct me on the Latin if I want. But really, the question that this presentation is going to try and answer is that if you were to divert your way into the Epicurean garden, would you be making the best decision of your life? Or would you be straying off the path of true knowledge? So, what are the 3 easy steps? Step 1. Don't be an idiot. Now, I do have to use the modern term of idiot because Michael has actually pointed out that Socrates' idiotes has a very special meaning in ancient Greece. We're taking the modern view of not being foolish. We've taken this example here of Epicureans being concerned with pleasure. But the first assumption that everybody has is that this is just filling every last whim that you're going to have, or any, basically grasping at anything that you can. It's actually a lot harder to have a good life of pleasure than you think. To demonstrate this, I'm actually going to talk about an idea of utility. Anybody who's taking an economics course, this is going to be more or less review. But I think this is actually a very useful tool in terms of explaining what's going on in terms of Epicurean philosophy and the idea of maximizing pleasure. Basically, the first thing that we want to think about when we talk about utility is we're getting a common measure. I'll spend $10 to go and watch the movie. If we gave you guys the same $10, I'm sure a lot of you would come up with other ideas. Maybe you take a friend for coffee, maybe you do something else. And of course, if we spend time with family, we don't actually have a good dollar value for that. We could maybe say, well, you know, I would have got paid this much at work, but work could have raised my wage and I still would have wanted to go on that vacation. So utility is just a common unit of measurement to say that when I'm comparing 2 things, whether or not I want to go to the movie or whether or not I want to go with coffees and friends, I'm going to go for the one that has the higher utility, which brings me into the second trait, which is to say the goal is to maximize the utility over your life. You've lived a good life if you've been able to get the most utility out of every action that you've taken, and you've lived a poor life if you've left some room where you could have had some utility left on the table, I suppose. And one tragic part, and this is what makes a life of pleasure so difficult, is that utility diminishes the more you do of something. And the best example is usually one of food. I'm sorry, this is just before lunch for some of you, so it gives you a reason to enjoy it that much more when you get it. But if I haven't eaten for a while, that first bit of food that I have is great. Second one, I'm content. Third one, well, that's, a great dinner. Fourth one, I start to feel a little bit sick. The enjoyment that I get out of each additional unit goes down, or in economic terms, the marginal utility decreases. And I can actually give an example here in terms of a graph. If you want to be the stereotypical hedonist and take everything in this one period here, you've got all of your utility here, but you've given up quite a bit in the later periods. We're going to say that this is the full life. Or you can have an even amount over each period of your life. If you actually stack these graphs on top of each other, you do have to believe me that I didn't change the numbers on these. If you compare the two, one life is fuller than the other, and it's not the one where you dumped everything into that first period, where you gave in to every last whim. The sum of uneven utility leads to unhappiness. So basically, Epicureanism, in terms of the idea of utility and in terms of pursuing pleasure, is this calculated form of it. You need to think about what you're doing, because if you follow every last whim, and the textbook actually has some examples of people who did actually want to follow every last whim, they're a good counterexample. You can get this idea of a full life without necessarily just doing the first thing that pops into your head or just spending every last dollar that you have. Obviously, if you're starving tomorrow and you've eaten a lot today, That's not a good life. We can actually take this from the Vatican Collection of Epicurean Sayings, that's on page 39. One should bring this question to bear on all one's desires. What will happen to me if what is sought by desire is achieved, and what will happen if it is not? You're playing the actuary, you're weighing the odds, you're deciding, is this actually going to maximize my utility over the course of my life? So, we go to step number 2. Focus on what matters. Michael talked a little bit about this earlier in the class, but we seem to be fearful of the world around us. We talk quite a bit about uncertainty, and if you remember some of the original maxims in the textbook, among the first 4 that we did, there's the conversation about death. And whether or not you think the idea of non-existence after death is a comforting one, the Epicureans very clearly think that this is a big problem for people, that the fact that they don't know what's going to happen to them after they die is a source of great discomfort. And this actually gets to a much more important idea here of the, I'm going to mess up the pronunciation of this, catastemic?
Yes.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Catastematic, sometimes you
Catastematic, yes.
Good.
Yeah, I might have misspelled it as well in the notes I was doing on it very early this morning. These ones here are the idea of the removal of distress. And in fact, you'll notice that this escapes our idea of marginal utility and having that diminishing marginal utility of accepting new things. You're actually reducing worry, you're reducing stress. And so the whole purpose of all of this knowledge and all of this exploration is to basically give yourself that certainty so that you're not worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, that you're not worried about what's going to happen to you when you die. It's okay. That's the big thing. And of course, once you do get to things like kind of weighing out the odds in terms of what else you're doing, you actually wind up having a life where, you know, if fate does kind of give you a bad turn, that's not that bad, because you still have something in reserve, as opposed to spending everything today and then finding out that you lost your job. The quote for this one, which I've taken quite a few passages out for the shape of the slide, do not believe that there is any other goal to be achieved by the knowledge of meteorological phenomena than freedom from disturbance and a secure conviction. And this is the letter that Michael was referring to earlier in the class. The other thing that you'll notice about this philosophy is that the Epicurean ethics are actually highly practical. We were talking about the idea that if you see something, it's probably the case. Certainly there's going to be some cases where people will come up with thought experiments, but one thing that the Epicurean could say to somebody like, let's say, the Parmenidean, especially somebody who's using Zeno's paradoxes, is that in the end, he is actually dealing with observations that he's making. Now, they're conflicting observations, and so he is doing some reflection on it after the fact, but nobody's really denying that this is what we've all agreed that we're talking about, and this is what we've seen. And it seems that these hallucination examples tend to be something that maybe exists more for the Stoics to involve their dialectic. You'll notice that the Epicureans have absolutely no time for that. You're going to create a new set of worries if you're wondering, oh my God, is this really a dream? Maybe I'd kind of hoped that for the presentation, but other than that, you can see that the Epicureans are really going to be more concerned about the practical element in terms of what their philosophy will achieve. And after you've worried about that, once you've kind of cleared your mind of all of those concerns, then you can start worrying about the connected pledges. Then you can worry about what you're going to have for dinner. But the big thing here is you already have that knowledge that if you hold back, well, you don't suffer diminishing marginal utility. You have that much more that you can take from. So if I kind of only eat when I'm hungry, I'm going to enjoy every meal that I take. Chance has a small impact to the wise man, while reasoning has arranged for, is arranging for, and will arrange for the greatest and most important matters throughout the whole of his life. And this is from the Principal Doctrines, which is actually, if you have two things that you can read over the weekend, the Principal Doctrines and the Vatican Sayings are probably the ones that will give you the most really interesting stuff to talk about with your friends. And finally, public life will not free us from Murphyism, instead brings about its own pain. I am running a little bit short on time, so I'll skip past this part, but the idea here is that they do like the idea of this community of friends together, where you're not going to be bringing on this concern of the ruler. Just ask Barack Obama whether or not he feels he can sleep without security guards. You get the idea from there, and I'll have to leave these quotes for the reading. So finally, step 3, tend to yourself and tend to your friends. Every friendship is worth choosing for its own sake. though it takes its origin from the benefits it confers on us. This is the big thing here, is that many people will argue that a hedonist is only concerned for themselves, but you will find a ton of comments like this in Epicureans, which is to say that, yes, I may be friends with you because I enjoy your company, but eventually it is something that grows into a reciprocal relationship. In fact, somebody really isn't worthwhile if they can't bring something to the table, and they're not going to hang out with you if you can't bring something as well. The constant friend is neither he who always searches for utility, nor he who never links friendship to utility. For the former makes gratitude a matter for commercial transaction, while the later kills off good hope for the future. That's effectively just saying everything I said before. So in my last minute, I'll just get quickly through these last slides and give you some questions to think about over the weekend. The importance of friendship cannot be overstated, but do we really need Epicurus to tell us this? We may be seeking our own pleasure, but could you really imagine doing it without friends? This is the big thing, that there's not a lot in Epicurus that really doesn't make that much sense when you think about it. But in the end, it's not enough just to cultivate good friendships. We actually need to be somebody who's worth being a friend with. When it comes to the good life, I'll give you one final quote. We are born only once, and we cannot be born twice. And one must for all eternity exist no more. You are not in control of tomorrow, and yet you delay your opportunity to rejoice. Life is ruined by delay, and each and every one of us dies without enjoying leisure. Leisure is designed to be enjoyed today in moderation. And so I'll skip ahead to my questions. 1, where does Epicurus fit in our globalized world of trade and private ambition? Are we a refutation of his philosophy and what we've been able to accomplish? Or have we proved his point, that we're not living lives of pleasure and leisure anymore? Number 2, does Epicurus allow for indifference to others outside of our communities? We talked about communities of friends and our obligations to our friends, but what about people who aren't involved in that community? And finally, the last one, with one final quote, third man. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. Could an Epicurean world ever produce great men?